A small mom and pop landlord in Portland, Maine got caught in a trap due to rent control and anti-landlord laws. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Portland, Maine. Now, I have mentioned Portland, Maine in a couple of other articles before, particularly about their rent control policy, okay? So we should realize that they are a very far left-leaning anti-landlord place, okay? This is not the kind of place where you want to be buying an investment property. And unfortunately, in the story that I'm going to be covering today, the small mom and pop landlord decided to have a rental property in Portland, Maine, and it is going to cost them a lot of money, okay? And it sucks. It absolutely sucks because I hate seeing small landlords get caught in this sort of situation here, where the laws change or the laws are so vague that you don't understand them and you end up getting caught in the mess. You know, they always say, hey, we're passing this law because we want to get those bad landlords, you know, those bad landlords who are trying to abuse tenants, right? And what they end up doing is they catch good landlords with those laws, while the bad landlords, you know, they keep doing what they're doing because they don't care, okay? They just don't care. So in this case, I believe, right, now I have to make a few assumptions, and I'm going to go over those assumptions as I go through the article, but I believe that this is the case of a good landlord who didn't know the law, okay? Where a lot of small mom and pop landlords, they are not as knowledgeable about the landlord tenant law of every single locality, you know, where they're investing. Now, they should be. They should be. I admit that when I got my first rental property, I didn't look up the landlord tenant law for the place where the property was located. I didn't. I should have. And a lot of newer landlords make that same mistake. There's no problem with that. A lot of us, we learn as we go. But in this situation, that's what's going to cost them big time. And you know what? When I read about stuff like this is what drives small mom and pop landlords out of the business, where they don't even want to rent their properties. And that's exactly what happened here. After this landlord got burned, guess what? She decided, I'm not renting my property anymore. These tenants have got to go. So yeah, guess what? There goes a rental property. There goes a piece of affordable housing, just because these tenants, right? These tenants demanded that, you know, we're paying too much rent. We're paying too much rent. Whatever, okay? Let me get into this article, and but before I get into it, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So, would you suggest a small mom and pop landlord, you know, maybe somebody who owns one single family home, even offer the place for rent in a place like Portland, Maine, or New York, or Boston, or Los Angeles, or Seattle, okay? Keep in mind that a lot of small landlords, they turn houses that they used to live in themselves. It used to be their principal residence, right? They just turn that into a rental when they move somewhere else. And I believe that is the exact case here in this article, okay? So would you even suggest somebody do that? Or would you just say, hey, don't bother? If you want to own a rental, go buy a rental after you sell that place. Go buy a rental somewhere where landlords are treated right. That's what I say, okay? Do not just turn your former home into a rental thinking, oh, I want to hold this place and, you know, everything will be fine if you're in a place like New York or, you know, Connecticut or somewhere ridiculous with ridiculous anti-landlord laws. That's dumb, okay? I mean, yeah, it's great to keep that equity and maybe build that equity up higher, but you're going to face so much risk of just something going wrong. Anyway, let me get into the article. There's actually two articles today, and I'll get into the first one first. They're describing the same story just from different points of view. This article is coming from BangorDailyNews.com, and it says, Portland landlord who flouted rent control rules likely won't get penalty. Yeah, and the way they make it sound is like, oh, the landlord was just like, yeah, really no, F them rent control rules. I'm just going to do what I want. That's not what I read when I read the article, though. So anyway, let's get into it. Portland's Rent Control Board has found a landlord to be in substantial non-compliance with the city's rent control ordinance for the very first time, but she's unlikely to see any actual penalties. Following nearly 6 hours of discussion during a Thursday night meeting, the Rent Board found Elizabeth Kane failed to register her long-term rental property at 36 Sawyer Street with the city in 2023, and then unjustly raised her tenant's rent by 22% that year. That went beyond the allowable rent increase under city law, which was 7% in 2023. No increases should have been taken while the unit was unregistered, Philip Matthew, the Rent Board's chairperson, said. We may recommend penalties that are fairly substantial. It is ultimately up to the city to choose how to enforce those penalties. So yeah, they're like, okay, the city is only going to allow you to raise your rent 7% in 2023, right? And you increased your rent by 22%. Now I tell everybody, if you bought a rent control property in a rent controlled city and you knew that it was under rent control, you have to comply by the law. Everyone knows this. In my opinion, 99% of landlords are going to do this. Some landlords are going to, see if they can get away with it. And I don't think this is the case of a landlord getting away with it. And I'm going to explain why as we continue. But since rent control was instituted in Maine's largest city 3 years ago, Portland has declined to fine a single landlord despite nearly 200 complaints and dozens of violations and a recommendation from the city's rent board that it do so. And so basically they haven't fined any landlords for violating rent control right now, as long as the landlord admits that, hey, they did something wrong and then gives the tenant back the excess rent that they paid. And that is fair, okay? But, I don't believe in rent control policies at all, okay? There should be no rent control at all. And when you skip down a little bit, it says that they could have fined her up to $500 per day for every day that she charged rent that was above the rate that they allowed. And so, this could add up to thousands and thousands of dollars for a small landlord like this one here in this story. That's ridiculous, okay? You'd put her out of business. And is that what they want? They want to lose rental properties? But they're going to end up losing them anyway because they screwed this lady over. And she's just like, I don't want to deal with it anymore. So I'm going to skip down a little bit in this article to describe, or so that I can get into what her reasoning was, right? And it says right here, the vast majority of Portland landlords make a good faith effort to abide by the law, added Matthew, the rent board chair. For example, Kane said Thursday she did not register her building because she believed it to be exempt. Once alerted to her noncompliance, Kane proactively contacted the city's housing safety office to register, Matthew said, right? And so basically, she thought that she didn't need to register the building because it was in an exempted category, and it turns out she was wrong, okay? Now, that's easy to understand. A lot of people, they don't understand the rules of who needs to comply, who doesn't. And like I said, it's not like they send us a mailing saying, hey, landlord, we changed the law. Here's the new law. Here's what you need to do. No. We're supposed to figure that stuff out on our own. A lot of us, we're working other full-time jobs, or we have full-time businesses outside of being a landlord. And so it is very difficult for us to keep up with all the changes in the law. So anyway, I'm going to skip over to the second article. And this one's coming from pressherald.com. And it says, Portland couple says their landlords retaliated after they complained of rent hike, right? And, when I was reading this story, I was like, this is interesting, but it's the same story, okay? It's the same story, but it's with, from the tenant's perspective, and the tenant was, kind of like, telling, how awful it was that their landlord rose their rent on them. So they actually got into the numbers a little bit in here. And it says that, stand by. Okay, it says that in March, a few months before their lease was scheduled to be up in June, the couple got an email from their landlords offering to renew for another year, but stating that their rent would go up by $135 from $1,950 to $2,085 a month, an increase of about 7%. Okay? So they were going to increase the rent in this place from $19.50 a month to $20.85 a month, which would have been a 7% increase, which sounds like, oh yeah, that's perfect. That's complying with the law. Everything is perfect, right? But that's not the case, right? And it says, Davis and Maddie said they were thrilled about the renewal, but the 7% increase gave them pause. They didn't know a lot about Portland's rent control ordinance, but they thought the increase might be out of compliance, right? And the reason it's out of compliance is quite interesting. It really turns out that, okay, it says that when Davis and Maddie started digging into the rules, they also realized their apartment was not registered as a long-term rental, and they were paying 22% more than the previous tenants, both of which are violations. So the issue was never that the rent increase that the landlord gave these tenants was more than the 7% allowed by law. The issue was that the tenants were paying more than the previous tenants. So these people, they came in, they signed a lease, they said, hey, we're perfectly willing to pay that amount. That amount is reasonable, and let's go. We agree to this, right? And then after they get there, they're like, nope, we're not paying that much anymore now. So we're going to basically take them to court and then force them to give us our money back, and then force them into a situation where they're renting a unit to us at a loss. That's what I'm reading, okay? So imagine, and this is the scenario that I am getting from this article, okay? You have a mortgage on your building, on your house, of $2,000 a month, okay? You rent your house out for $2,500 a month so that it covers the mortgage and the expenses. Then, after the tenants move in, they come back and they're like, no, I'm not paying $2,500 a month. I'll pay you $1,800 a month. And the problem being that the $1,800 a month doesn't cover your mortgage payment. So you went from making a profit and being able to pay all of your expenses to now you're subsidizing the tenants living for them. That is the situation that was described here in the article, right? And they even, in the second article, they even talked to the landlord a little bit, right? And the landlord, after all of this, rent control decision was made, the landlord decided not to renew their lease. And now the tenants are claiming, oh, well, the landlord's retaliating against us, right? And I'm like, no, I got to get rid of you because we're going to move back into the house, okay? We're moving back in, you got to go, right? Which, who knows if that's true or not, but simply put, you screwed the landlord over. The landlord has every right to not renew your lease and end your tenancy right there, okay? You're not being evicted, but you're not going to be allowed to stay past the whatever, length of the lease originally was. I believe in the article they said it was 12 months. So, yeah, you screwed yourself over if you wanted somewhere to stay, because there's no reason a landlord should have to be forced to continue to rent to you at a loss. That's just dumb. So, yeah, there's one more important little thing that they said in this article, right? And they said, we are mom and pop landlords, she said. This is our only rental property in Portland, and we purchased it with the intention of moving closer to my aging parents, right? And this is testimony from the owner to the rent board in terms of why they were going to be not renewing the lease on these tenants, right? And so it's their only property. They live out of state, and they're likely renting it at a loss due to these rent control laws. It is a bad situation to be in. And like I said, don't buy property. Don't turn your former home into a rental property in a place like this, okay? If you want to be a landlord, try investing somewhere where they treat landlords correctly, where we have rights, where our property rights are important, where they're not being constantly threatened.